Seth MacFarlane has found much success with his hit animated series, Family Guy. He followed up with several others, including American Dad and The Cleveland Show. Known for his love of 80s pop culture properties to include movies, music, and television, MacFarlane sets out now to tell stories of space exploring adventurers in his new series, The Orville. Set in the 25th century, crew members of a starship, Orville, travel the galaxy while learning lessons about tolerance, humanity, and love. If it sounds familiar to you, MacFarlane has no problem with that. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm on the couch. All right. Once again, this is Ronald, and I'm on the couch after watching The Orville. The Orville, created by Seth MacFarlane, starring Seth MacFarlane, Adrianne Palicki, Penny Johnson Jerald, Scott Grimes, Peter Macon, Halston Sage, Jay Lee, Mark Jackson, and Jessica Szohr. So The Orville is, and if you listen to the top of the episode, I purposefully kind of talked a little bit about The Orville, it being a show about space exploration. And essentially what's happening in the show is you have a crew, and it's set in the 25th century, and they are on a spacefaring vessel called the Orville, and they are exploring the universe as a part of a diplomatic union of multiple galaxies. So, or across one galaxy, different species across the galaxy. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's because it's also the plot of most of the Star Trek series, in some form or another, being on multiple diplomatic missions. Now, this one is created by Seth MacFarlane. And once again, if you know his work, he's done Family Guy, he's done American Dad, he's done The Cleveland Show, he's done several movies, including, I believe it was called Ted, and something about the West, A Million Ways to Die in the West, I think it was called. So Seth MacFarlane has a pretty solid track record of not just doing things that are funny, not just doing funny shows, but a lot of slapstick humor, a lot of reference humor, a lot of callback jokes to the 80s, which is a decade that he really likes, does the 90s as well sometimes even the 70s, but a lot of it is in the 80s. Does a lot of that, a lot of slapstick, all that, like I said. And all of that baggage comes into anyone who's watching this show. When I first saw the previews for this show, I immediately saw that they were marketing the jokes first. Now, let me just say, it's 2020. This show has 2 seasons out. They're all on Hulu. And the reason why I'm pointing that out is because the last episode of this show aired last year, April 2019. And I'm sure you're wondering why I'm reviewing this now. Well, I never caught up on it. I'd watched the first season when it came out a couple of years ago. Enjoyed it. Never got around to the second season. Got caught up doing other things, but we're all inside. So I thought about it the other day and I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll just watch the rest of it. I really enjoyed the first season. So I'm saying all that to catch you up to right now. So the point is, you're watching the show. When you see the previews for the show, when it first came out a couple years ago, I was like, oh, okay, so it's like a slapstick version of of Star Trek. It's like a funny version of Star Trek, so they're not really taking it seriously. However, so I started watching the show, first couple episodes, and I get that vibe. I'm like, okay, so they're not taking this seriously. This is like Star Trek with jokes, with a lot of jokes. But then, I started continuing watching the first season, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. They are taking it seriously. They're just having jokes along with it. So you're watching a show, and somebody like me who is a Trekkie, my Star Trek being of choice is Star Trek Voyager, but someone who is a Trekkie, I'm watching this, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. And it caught me off guard, because if you just watch the first 2 episodes of this series and you walked away saying, this isn't for me, it's a bunch of jokes, then you kind of missed out on kind of how the series then begins to lean in and take itself a little bit more seriously. There are jokes, there are one-liners, there are punchlines, but it is not the majority of the show. Where if you watch a show like Star Trek, you barely get any jokes whatsoever. So then when you watch a show like The Orville, it is Star Trek. And it does not shy away from that comparison whatsoever. The only thing they don't do in The Orville is teleport places, but everything else, away missions, shuttle bays, launches, a holodeck, replicating food, all of that stuff is there. And anyone that's a Trekkie that watched this show will not mind any of these references because you're still watching something that is very true to the original formula, except that there's jokes every now and then. And that being said, now I'm through 2 seasons. I've kind of feel like they've leaned away from the jokes as heavily as they did before because they're taking themselves so seriously, and it's something you don't expect from Seth MacFarlane. So let me just start off by saying, if you liked anything that is Star Trek, if you liked Battlestar Galactica, if you like Doctor Who, any of those shows, you will like this show. You have to give it more than the first 2 episodes, but once you get into it a little bit, you'll be like, oh, okay, we're being serious. What this show does is it deals with things that Star Trek would not deal with. It deals with relationships. And in a very specific way. And it deals with them in the way that it acknowledges it, that the scenarios that it's in are very weird, where Star Trek did not do that. Star Trek was never looked at itself and said, this is weird. The Orville does that a lot. It's like, hey, this guy's a blob. That's weird. And then they move past it and then start telling you the story. But in the way that it does that, it kind of disarms me as a viewer because I watch a lot of Star Trek. And I remember years ago, I watched it with my then girlfriend. I was watching Star Trek Voyager, and one of the characters, Neelix, walked onto the screen, and he walked on there. Sorry. Neelix walks on the screen, and my then girlfriend turns to me and looks at her and goes, "Who's that freak?" And he's an alien. So, but Star Trek doesn't really acknowledge that people are strange looking, any of that. Whereas in the Orville, it's always like, look at this big-headed guy. And then it goes into it. And it doesn't do that all the time, but it doesn't enough so that we can acknowledge, okay, this is weird, but we can lean into it, which I think is a good low barrier to entry for people who don't watch shows like this. But if you watch shows like this, you should be gobbling up the Orville because it's a great show. And all the good things about it is that it does all the things that Star Trek does. It leans into questions of sexuality, identity, race. It leans into all of those things, time travel, all of that. And it does it in a way that's really enjoyable. I mean, like, they contemplate questions in here. There's a couple of things where, there's an episode in which a person and I'm going to do it I'm just going to set premises. I'm going to try not to spoil any episodes. There's an episode where they find an iPhone because they're in the 25th century. So they find an iPhone, and using the iPhone, they replicate an entire holodeck based on all the information on the iPhone. And what it does, it's very funny because I'm sitting here and I'm like, this plays with 2 ideas. One, the idea that someone, is longing for the things that are of the past, like the iPhone, but also the idea that all of our information is on our phone. And if they wanted to replicate a version of us in the future, that is exactly how they would do it. So it doesn't seem as far-fetched when they take all the information on the phone and are able to make a holodeck program that is basically someone's life. Crazy good episode. There's the idea of falling in love with an artificial life form because, of course, there's androids, and just like in Star Trek, they had Data, and they had the Doctor, who's a hologram program on the Voyager. They've had several instances of artificial life forms. In this case, you have the artificial life form who is a Kaylon named Isaac, and it's just like a robot with 2 big blue eyes, and there's a storyline in which someone is falling in love with Isaac and what that looks like as it goes forward. So the idea of being in a type of love that wouldn't be acceptable to other people. Then, of course, it plays with the idea of global politics, integrating into other species of society in which their customs are unlike ours. There's a planet in which everybody born on the planet is born a man, and therefore and actually in this case they would all be born a male, and everybody. All of the relationship and all of the politics that come from that, all the gender identity that comes from that, especially when at one point someone is born a female, and what that society does and how we and they always use the union of the galactic, whatever they're calling themselves. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they always use the union as kind of like the earth foil, or what would we like in our time right now think of that type of society. So it does a good job of asking those questions. There's an episode in which they go to a planet, and the part of the planet is a total democracy, meaning that the only way they vote for everything is through likes and dislikes, it's a lot like the one episode of Black Mirror called Nosedive, in which they're using likes in which to judge society. And this like takes that to its ultimate conclusion, which again, fantastic episode. And I believe that's early on in season 2. Overall, the show is fantastic. It's well acted. At times, it's a little hokey and a little idealistic, in a way that Star Trek also was. So I'm not, again, I'm not shying away from any of that whatsoever. But the acting in it, everybody that does it, everybody's taking it very seriously. I don't think there's any necessarily Emmy jobs that are coming out of this. Like, it's very basic level, almost like, if you could call a space show a procedural, almost that style of acting. And those of you that watch a lot of procedurals will understand what I'm saying. Like, basically they're constrained to a time, so they don't really have a lot of time for you to emote. You just need to get to the point, hit your marks, and let's get to the next scene. But with all of that being said, I'm sitting here watching Seth MacFarlane, who I really don't take seriously as an actor because he's a creator, but he's doing a great job in the show. Like, he's doing a great job as a starship captain, going from giving commands to then like making jokes and being like a captain who is also 100% very human. And I think all of the humanity of this show, I think, is one of the things that I really enjoy about it, which is that everybody on the show is a real human, even if they're aliens. But the way we understand it to be humanity, they still want to deal with things like love, compassion, empathy, all of the things that Star Trek stood for. And you can see that even though this is created by Seth MacFarlane, this is a man who loved Star Trek. Clearly. And if he says he didn't, I think he'd be lying, because he has cameos from Star Trek cast members all the time. The recurring cast is star-studded. He has Norm Macdonald, Chad Coleman, Victor Garber, Larry Joe Campbell, Ted Danson, Kelly Hugh, Mike Henry, of course, who's worked with Seth MacFarlane on Family Guy and The Cleveland Show. His guest stars, of course, is star-studded. Rob Lowe, Liam Neeson, Charlize Theron, Michaela McManus, Bruce Willis, Tony Todd, aka the Candyman. So he really went out on a limb on this show, and I don't know if it's getting the buzz. And granted, I'm a little late to the party on the second season, and I know in the first season I saw some people saying that they liked this show. But I mean, especially if you're in quarantine right now and if you need something new to watch, this is an easily bingeable show. It feels good because there was a couple times where watching the show I got lost in that world, which feels good right now for the state that we're in right now. It feels good to be out of the quarantine world and in the 25th century, in a place that's very an idealistic view of our future. And I love idealistic views of the future, because Lord knows the state that we're in right now it doesn't feel good to be where we are. But to look at somebody that says, hey, this is a possible glimpse of our future, and it's a future where compassion and empathy and equality reign supreme, then I mean, I'm here for it. And it just, I really just enjoy this show. I'm sitting here wondering how to recommend it to people who don't like shows like this. And if you don't, I think this is a good entry level for you to maybe like other shows like this. But if you're a person who likes Doctor Who, again, if you're a person that likes any of the Star Trek, if you're a big fan of it's not as Star Warsian because remember, Star Wars is more of the, the great space opera person on the quest, whereas Star Trek really is dealing with humanity and winning hearts and minds on an individual level. It's not really a quest show. So if that is your jam, you should watch The Orville. If you haven't watched The Orville, this is a show for you. If you have kids, this is a great family show. 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 If you want to settle your kids in, and even if you want to do it like once a night, once a week, there's 30 episodes. You can do this for a while. You know what I mean? Like once, hey, let's watch an episode of The Orville. You can do it with your kids. Great thing. You're going to be okay. Now there are some jokes and maybe there's some episodes there are some very special episodes, if you will, that might lead to a type of conversation that you can have with them. But I think this is a good entry level show for a family, for a person who wants to get more into sci-fi, a person who wants to, I don't understand Star Trek. This is a good entry level for you. That being said, I mean, I give it 4 stars. I give it 4 or 5 stars. I'm sitting here and I'm laughing because I'm like, there's a part of me that's like, it's a little hokey at times, but it just doesn't feel like it's not being honest about itself. So it's hard for me to grade it down for that, because it's like I would expect this show to be exactly what it is and to be a little hokey, because that's what this show is. That's what they're doing in this universe. So I think you should watch it. I think the drama elements are very good. I think the action parts, I was sucked in. It feels compelling. I think if you watch this show, you will probably enjoy it. And now again, I just want to touch on this one more time. If you watch the first 2 episodes and you're like, this isn't for me, I encourage you to watch a couple more, lean into it a little bit, because the first 2 episodes and the rest of it are completely different. As it gets past itself and stops just leaning in on the jokes, it kind of it goes more into the story, and then it begins to make more sense, and it begins to feel like a much more disciplined show, in that, okay, we're going to focus in on the characters and humanity, all of that. And then we're going to have a couple jokes every now and then, just to break the tension and all that, which feels a lot better to watch. Yeah. So with that, 4 of 5 stars, definitely enjoy it. Share it with friends, watch it with family. Think you'll enjoy it. It's a good escape, great escape from the quarantine. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of ohitsBigRon Studios. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. To find out more about this show and other ohitsBigRon Studio shows, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ohitsBigRon. That's at ohitsBigRon. If you like this show, check out our sister show, Time Well Spent. Leaving the Theater will be back soon, but until then, I'll be here on the couch.